In this video, I wanted to show my process for hand dyeing my yarn. I purchased my yarn already in 100-gram skeins, so this is fingering weight yarn that I'm working with here. I take it out of the package. I try and separate it out. It's a little bit stuck to itself at first. Then I take some cotton yarn. I tie each strand or each skein with a strand of cotton yarn. That helps me for when the yarn's all in the pot cooking and you have multiple skeins in the pot. I can tell which yarn, which skein is which. Now this particular skein, when I had wrapped up the cotton yarn on it, there was one strand that just wasn't in the right spot. So I had to take it off and redo it, and that happens. So I will go through and I will take however many skeins I plan on dyeing that day, tie each skein with a piece of cotton yarn, and then twist it loosely so that it can go into the pre-soak water. I do it loosely so that the water can get all in all the parts it needs to get into and soak all the yarn up. So I will just continue to do this until I have the number of skeins that I'm going to be dyeing for the day. So now my skeins are ready for the pre-soak. I fill up some tubs with lukewarm water. I add a little bit of white vinegar to the water to help. The dye will then stick to the yarn a little bit better if it's got a little bit of vinegar in it. So once I've got my tub full, I take the skeins that I have already pre-wound with the cotton yarn on it, and I stick it in the water. I just gently squeeze it to get the air out of the yarn so that it will eventually sink and just be all submerged in the tub. It takes a little bit of persuasion, but it all gets there eventually. As you can see, the bubbles coming out, that's just the air coming out of the yarn. Once I get all the skeins in there, I just keep working that yarn until it all becomes pretty saturated and the yarn wants to sink and be under the surface. I need that yarn to be fully saturated. It will sit in the soaking water for a couple hours at least. Sometimes I'll do it overnight to have it ready for me in the morning. It just depends on what I'm doing. So I'm going to show how I do a tonal yarn. This is my mist colorway that I'll be dyeing. So I put the dye directly in the water. The water is heating up on the stove. I've got some citric acid in the water. Just pour the dye in there. I stir it around with my fancy plastic spoon just to get the dye completely dissolved in there and all even throughout the pot. Then I get my yarn out of the pre-soak water, squeeze out the majority of the water. That way when it goes into the dye water bath, it will soak up that water, and then the dye will go throughout the skein and dye the skein. So I am squeezing out water and getting it ready to go in. Then I just put the yarn in the dye bath. The water is heating up at this point, and so I will just use my spoon to kind of massage it around. I want to try for this particular colorway to get it pretty even. So when the yarn goes in, a lot of times it folds up on itself. The dye won't get in all those nooks and crannies. So I just kind of move it around a little bit until that all looks like I want it to look. Once it's done cooking, I've got to sit and wait for it to cool off, and that can take a while. But once it's cooled off, it gets a bath. I use Eucalan wool wash to rinse my yarn out. So I've put a few skeins in this cool water with some Eucalan. I'm just kind of moving it around, really not moving the yarn too much because I don't want it to get tangled up. So I'll just kind of massage it, let it soak. Meanwhile, I've got to wash the pots. So every time you do a dye, you got to wash the pots. So I put some rubbing alcohol in a spray bottle, and I use that to clean the insides of each pot that I use. So this is kind of a tedious part, but it needs to be done. Once the dye or the yarn is done soaking, I spin it in my washing machine to get all the water out and let it hang to dry. Then I get to play with it. Once it's completely dry, it's ready to be skeined up. So I will take each skein. Each skein comes with 3 ties on it. One of the ties is actually the ends of the yarn, and so that I leave there. And then I'll just take one of the extra ties off, and that just makes it so that when it's in a skein, it looks nicer. You don't have to deal with it when you get the yarn. I'll run it through my hands to get everything kind of straightened out, wind it up, and put it in a skein. And I'll just do that with every skein that I've dyed up and get it all skeined up and ready to go for its photo shoot. And this is my setup for the photo shoot. You need lots of light. Once it's done being photographed and it's ready for the shop, then I need to label it. So I will write the color name on the label, get the belly band all set up and taped on and ready to go, and then it's ready for my shop. It takes a long time to get all this stuff together, but it's a lot of fun. I hope you've enjoyed watching this process, and thank you so much for watching with me.